The MLB playoffs are up and running and firing away, and the Cardinals are not a part of it for the second straight year. But today on this episode of Dealing the Cards, we wanted to talk through what are some things the Cardinals can learn from maybe some specific former managers in the playoffs, some specific experiences and things that we're seeing from different teams in the playoffs, and also like this new playoff format where underdogs continue to be favored. Is that a good thing, a bad thing for the St. Louis Cardinals? Will they learn the right lessons from it? We're going to discuss on this episode of Dealing the Cards. Sandy, it's good to be back on with you. We missed you on Sunday. Bernie and I had a fun conversation. So if any of you missed that, go check out Sunday's pod. But we're back with Sandy today. I don't know if you've been watching much of the MLB playoffs, but I'm going to do a Bob Costas real quick and be like, oh, wow, big home run just happened. We should be so excited. It sucks because I remember Bob Costas being awesome, but oh my goodness, like the Giancarlo Stanton home run, he was just like a deep fly ball to left field and it is gone. Wow, big home run for the Yankees. And it's like, that's a massive home run, but let's just whatever's happened. It's like I don't know how much you watch of Al Michaels on Thursday Night Football right now, and it's like, dude, get out of the booth.
Yeah,
it's so bad now.
It's bad.
But anyways, today we're going to jump into some different topics related to the playoffs, and obviously the Cardinals aren't in it, and we might have some conversations about like, could the Cardinals sneak their way in next year, all that kind of stuff. That's not the point of today's episode, really, though. The point is, what are the things that we think the Cardinals should be learning from this, / what do we think they might be actually learning for some of the playoff stuff? So I think we're going to have three major topics today, and kind of the theme of each of them is what can the Cardinals learn from blank? And Sandy, let's just start with the elephant in the room that so many people want to talk about. And I think for the most part, the three of us consistently stay away from and don't endorse. But I think at this point, we at least have to have the conversation, right? Sandy, what can the Cardinals learn from Mike Shildt?
Nothing. I mean, I'll be honest.
Nothing?
I'll be honest. Yeah, I think the idea that the Cardinals would have been better with Mike Shildt this year is ridiculous on its face. I'm not like the biggest Mike Shildt hater, but I'm also not the biggest Mike Shildt supporter. I think that there was a time after Mike Shildt was fired, or maybe right before he was fired, when he put Alex Reyes in that wild card game, when I saw dozens of accounts on Twitter that I now see defending him saying fire Mike Shildt. People had problems with the way he managed bullpens. People had problems with the way he filled out the lineup card. And those are two things a manager actually does. But more than that, it's ridiculous to compare the two because the Cardinals and Padres are just not the same team right now. The Cardinals' star power is Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado, and those stars are aging, and they're basically non-existent right now. Nolan Arenado was like barely above average at the plate, solid defensively. Paul Goldschmidt was okay defensively at a position that doesn't matter defensively and below average at the plate. That's their superstar power. Meanwhile, the Padres have Fernando Tatis Jr., they have Dylan Cease and Joe Musgrove in their rotation, which are and like those are the bigger in terms of like profile. Those are more important pitchers than anyone on our team. They've got Manny Machado. They've got Ha-Sung Kim. They have stars up and down the lineup. Even guys like Jake Cronenworth, I would say have more star power than most players in the Cardinals lineup. And I know I haven't named everybody. Xander Bogaerts is there. There's just a ton of star power on that roster. It's all up and down. It is a better roster than the Cardinals have right now. Oh, and by the way, their farm system continues to churn out top-end talent. Ethan Salas will be up in a few years. They just pulled off a Juan Soto trade.
Yeah, aggressive GM who uses those prospects to go get stuff.
And they spend a ton of money. Like they just pulled off a Juan Soto trade. They land guys. They always compete big. The Padres swing for the fences. It doesn't always work, but it's just not the same team as the Cardinals have, and it's really not fair. Mike Shildt has an embarrassment of riches there. It's just completely different than what the Cardinals are working with. The biggest move the Cardinals have made at the deadline in the last, I don't know, however long, is Eric Fedde. I'm sorry, but that just doesn't compare to a Juan Soto acquisition or even like a Josh Hader acquisition. Like it's just not the same. So to compare the two is ridiculous. The Padres have way more to work with. And you know what? They should be in the NLDS. They have one of the best rosters in baseball. And I would say more than anything, Mike Shildt underachieved throughout the first half of this year and then righted the ship. I don't think it's a masterclass of fantastic managing. So that's what I've got.
Hey, all I gotta know is Cardinals Rally says, and he says this all the time.
Go,
if Sandy has Sandy fans, then I'm one of them. So thanks for the support, Cardinals Rally.
Thank you very much
on that one. Yeah, Sandy. So, just a quick question. What do you think based off run differential, what the Cardinals' expected record was this year? Just give me how many
Oh,
wins they're expected to have based on the run differential.
I looked at this recently, so it's kind of unfair,
It's
but
okay.
I know the run differential is like -55 or something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna say like a 74 win team.
So based on run differential, so Pythagorean
Yeah,
win loss expected,
72.
they're expected to win 76 games this year, and the
Okay.
Cardinals won 83. Which what is
Yeah,
that?
it's they
7
totally
games.
outperformed that.
They totally outperformed what they're supposed to be as a team this year, and the amount of close games they had to win, which took managing a bullpen really well. Again, I'm not trying to sit here and act like Ollie Marmol is a terrific manager. We've talked about this, that if they would have fired him, would have made sense. There was some, like, especially again, I've thrown out the Albert Pujols side of things. There's unique personalities like that where I'm like, I
Yeah.
would make the move for sure.
Yeah.
But in general, I don't think Ollie Marmol is the problem. And I think Bernie made a really good point about this recently, that like he's so associated with John Mozeliak that no one's ever going to accept him because he's got like that stench of John Mozeliak on him that is just kind of unshakable. And I feel bad for him. And so it's like there's something, and like Mike Shildt kind of had that. Like you said, people didn't really like, people act like we all loved Mike Shildt when he was here, and some people did, but a lot of people really worn out on him, especially his bullpen usage, like killed arms. And then he goes and has success elsewhere, and now people love him. Honestly, if Ollie went and had success elsewhere and John Mozeliak was here another 5 years, I think people would go and love Ollie later. But like he's associated with it, so people don't like him. With that being said, and I'll also address some of your things about the Padres being a different situation. I do think there are some things to learn from the Mike Shildt side of things where,
Yeah.
first of all, I mean, we kind of know, but we don't know. There is some stuff about the philosophical differences that's just going to always be a tough look for Mo now at this point, when it's like, hey, he goes to San Diego and has success there. He takes over for an accomplished manager and Bob Melvin, and they scale back the roster. Now, they scale back the roster in ways that I think were super smart roster building things.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
they did drop payroll. They did trade Juan Soto, but I think they made the team better this past year. So I
mean,
would
they addressed
argue
the pitching problems.
yeah, for sure. And they were way too like, seems weird to say star driven, but they were way too top heavy last year. And now they have like a really good mix of stars, young talent, pitching, bullpen. But
So
I do
just
think,
a good team.
yeah, but I do think it's fair to say at this point, I think every full season that Mike Shildt has managed and his club has made the playoffs. The second half record thing is a real thing with Mike Shildt, where in the second half, his team take off. And you could argue, okay, like really slow starts, that's a problem. But you can also say like something, he knows somehow how to get his team rallied up and ready to make a postseason run. This will be his, if they make the NLCS again, this will be his second NLCS appearance, right? Because he managed the Cardinals to one against the Nationals, which again, that didn't go well, but like they shouldn't have been there. And then again, the Padres could be taking, I mean, the Dodger game tonight doesn't look great so far, but like if they take down this Dodger team in another NLCS, I think at the very least, the way that Mike Shildt commands a clubhouse, has been able to find ways to win, scrappy leadership. I think in a lot of ways, he's a player's manager. I'm not saying Ollie's not these things. I think Ollie could be these things, but I do think it was a tough look to let go of Mike Shildt and to move on and go in these directions. And I think to what it speaks more to me is it's like you put a manager like a Mike Shildt in a situation like San Diego, he's going to have success because he's got the ingredients around him to succeed. And he kind of, when he started managing the Cardinals, he had some of those pieces around him. And if he would have stuck around longer, those pieces would have fallen away. And I think he wouldn't have found success. And that's probably where some of the philosophical differences come from, right? Because I think, like, if Mike Shildt, to your point, if Mike Shildt's managing the Cardinals this year, it's nothing against Mike Shildt. I just don't think it's better. It could have been worse. It could have been maybe slightly better, but I kind of doubt it.
I doubt it.
And so, like, to your point, their bullpen, I mean, for as much as we glaze the Cardinal bullpen, the Padres bullpen is better. It's elite.
Absolutely.
It's truly
the best bullpen. It's if not the best bullpen in baseball, it's top two. It's Cleveland, San Diego.
Yep.
It's an embarrassment of riches.
It's incredible. And then they've got the young pitching, right? Dylan Cease, Michael King. I mean, they have Yu Darvish and guys like that. They have a really interesting lineup with a strong mix of different kinds of bats, right? Where you have the Tatis, you have the Machado in there. You have Jerkison Profar, who popped off this year. You have Luis Ariz, you have Jackson Merrill. Like, yeah, so they just have all these ingredients here. They have a GM who goes all in to his own detriment sometimes, but again, Padres consistently make the playoffs and have gone deep a couple times now in a market that typically doesn't spend.
I just think a lot more than the Cardinals do, though.
Yeah, typically, yep, in recent years, but then they scale back after owner passed away, and even in a scale back year, AJ Preller figured out how to build a contender this year. And so I think for the Mike Shildt situation, what I've learned more from it is if you put a quality manager with in a good situation like that, good things can happen. If you put a quality manager like Bob Melvin in a terrible situation, like the Padres were the year before, it doesn't go well. And Bruce Bochy's had bad years. Tony La Russa's had bad years. Again, I'm not saying Ollie Marmol is those guys. I'm not saying that. I just don't think it's super fair to be like, see, Ollie sucks and look what Mike Shilt's doing.
Let's
I'm like,
talk
well,
about Craig Counsell.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Widely agreed, or it's like widely agreed upon before this year that Craig Counsell is not like, if not the best manager in baseball, like short list of top 3 for most.
Guess
people.
what their Pythagorean win Ross record was supposed to be this year?
Probably better than they finished by a good bit because the Cubs had a really good offense in the second half.
They were supposed to win 89 games and they won 83. The Cardinals were supposed to win 76 games and they won 83.
And I remember hearing a lot about how, Craig Counsell pushes all the right bullpens or all the right buttons with the bullpen. Like, Craig Counsell this, Craig Counsell that. Well, you know what? The Cubs paid him a ton of money and lured him away from a division rival, by the way, which they then used to justify not investing further in their major league club and took a step back. I just think the manager talk in general, I think is overhyped. I think it's really hard. First off, you can't quantify it. People can say, the Cardinals win 5 games without Ollie. Even if that was maybe true, you can't prove that to me. There's no way to do that. You just can't convince me of it because there's no real argument you can make. It's really hard to do that. You can't quantify it. And also, I don't think it's true in the first place. I think the best manager in baseball versus the worst manager in baseball, or you know what, we'll use like a top 5 versus a bottom 5 because there are cases of really bad managers, and that's fine. I don't think Ollie is that though. I'll say a top 5 versus a bottom 5 manager, like maybe 3 wins. That's where I lean. I just think that maybe they make some bad decisions, but they get lucky and stuff cancels out. Maybe 3 wins over the season, and 3 wins didn't get the Cardinals into the playoffs, and it certainly didn't fix the massive problems with this team. So
I could see an argument maybe for like a 6 to 7 win swing because I think a bad manager could lose you some games, and so like I can see like a bad manager gets you like a negative 3, 4, 5, maybe 5 wins at most, but even that's really a big stretch. And a positive manager can maybe get you a 3 or 4. But I think like
Lindor though is a 7-win player. Like, do we really think managers have that big an impact?
Agreed. So that's what I'm saying. Like, but I also think part of it's we would put Ollie in the class of at least average. Like, we think he's probably like a middle of the pack manager, probably. But a lot of people just act like he's the worst manager in baseball, and so like they think, there'd be a massive improvement. I'm like, well, I think you're underrating Ollie Marmol, and you're and at the same time overrating what other managers could do with the roster. But I completely agree with you. It's like, I mean, when you think about it, it's like I can't remember who said it one time. It's like the White Sox are breaking the norm this year because how many games do they win? Like
38.
Okay, so most years though, you can pencil in a minimum 50 wins for every team in baseball.
41 for the White Sox this year.
Okay, so 41. But typically, you can pencil in at least 50 to 55 wins for every other team. Like, that's the base minimum that every team, no matter who you are, basically wins that many games. And then it's like, so there's a 40 games in there, basically, if you want to be a 90-something win team to win. You can't, like, okay, so if the manager wins you, like, some people will be like, Mike Shildt would have won 10 more games to this roster. It's like, okay, so you're saying 10 more of those 40 wins are, so you're saying 30 wins were given from this talent on the roster that's like good? Does you like tracking what I'm saying there? Like, to your point, I think it's the players that get most of that going. But I do think there's a culture that's built with a clubhouse. Like, all that stuff's real. And there are decisions that make or break games. But sometimes you can also have good process where bad results happen, where it's like, I brought in Ryan Helsley at the 2-run lead in the 9th inning. That's good process. He blew the save. That's crazy. That sucks. And people blame Ollie. And it's like, what else would you have done? But then it's also like, you could,
thankless job.
Yeah. And then like he could have brought in John King. Okay. Maybe I shouldn't say John King for you.
It's always the right answer.
He could have brought in Cal Leahy and we're like, isn't Ryan Helsley like rested? And it worked out. And it's like, we're all still like, that was really dumb. Why didn't you bring Ryan Helsley? But it worked out. So it's just, to your point, I mean, we can belabor this all day, but I think managers get too much credit for wins sometimes, or for winning, like how much the team will win. But I do think there's a culture and all those kind of things. So, and maybe they get the best out of their players. Like, that stuff's real, but I think the decision making we overblow most of the time.
Absolutely, we do.
And
again, I just want to ask people.
Go ahead.
Do you think Ollie could have done a better job with the bullpen this year? Like, really?
No.
Like I want to ask these people who have a problem with it. Do you think you could have done better? Because the people that criticize managers generally the criticism comes from a place of he was wrong and I was right in that instance. And there are probably like 5 times a year where that's true. Even for someone like me or you that is like, I would say we are above average fans in terms of how plugged in we are with the team. Like we run a podcast, we watch the games, we know the players, but like maybe 5 times a year where I'm like, hey, that's really stupid. I would have done this. And then after the game, there's nothing that like disproves that. Like all the time, we hear people like, why didn't they put in Helsley? Well, if you'd been paying attention, Helsley's pitched 3 times in a row. You know, he wasn't available. Or like, oh, after the game, we hear from Jeff Jones, hey, Helsley has like a blister. He's not available tonight. It's that kind of thing where even when people think they're right, there's information they don't have that the manager has. We've talked about that before. Managers cannot just put players in positions to fail. That doesn't work either.
And they're not always going to tell us that stuff too, because they have to protect the players too. Like
100%. And strategy. You don't want to tell the other team, hey, Helsley's not pitching tomorrow either.
Yeah, for sure. Also, so we'll keep it moving. But Lucas brings up like a question people ask a lot, which is like, what about the fact that Mo felt the need to bring in Carp and Brandon Crawford for quote unquote leadership? Is that more of a Mo thing than a lack of ability on Ollie? I don't think it's a Mo thing or an Ollie thing. I think that's a Nolan Arenado and a Paul Goldschmidt thing.
Correct.
Like, and it's been talked about, and a lot of people like in the game or outside the game have like talked to this. It's not like veteran leadership is a real thing on rosters because there's a different kind of leadership that comes from a peer versus someone who's above you. And you'd be like, well, hire Matt Carper as a coach. It's like, he's no longer your peer now. He is one of your coaches. There's something beautiful about being in the trenches with another player who has more experience than you, can guide you in this. And Alec Burleson talked about this year, the impact Matt Carpenter had on him. Mason Wynn talked about the impact Brandon Crawford on him. Guess whose name I never heard someone bring up the impact he had on him? Paul Goldschmidt. I'm not saying he didn't, but like it's like there was a lot of stories about, and I'm not trying to say he wasn't like a leader, but clearly he's more of a neutral presence, and
he's a lead by example guy.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, that's fine, but then when Nolan Arenado's throwing a fit in the corner, that's not super helpful for a roster. And Nolan had those comments this offseason. He's like, we were too young. Like, boy, how's that Ollie's fault? Like Nolan, get a grip, dude. You like most of your performing talent last year was young. You want those guys in your roster. You want to trade them out for Brandon Crawford? That's weird. So again, I'm not gonna blame Ollie for that one. But again, people have their minds. Some people have their minds made up, and that's okay. Let's real quick before we continue on, I want to thank one of our sponsors of this podcast, and it's 314 Sports Cards and Collectibles. They're located at 9640 Olive Boulevard in Olivet. Open 10 to 5 Monday through Friday, 9 to 4 on Saturdays. Buy, sell, and trade all Pokemon cards and sports trading cards. So if we had Andrew on here, he'd be showing. He just got some new cards from 314. I think we're gonna do a pack opening soon too, but I know many of you already check them out and go in and love 314 Sports Cards and Collectibles. So again, make sure you check them out and let them know we sent you. But if you haven't been before, check them out. Check out their Instagram. They also do some different apps and stuff you can find on their link tree where you can like live bid on cards that they're selling and stuff too. So you don't even have to go in if you can't make it there, if you live outside the St. Louis area. So if you're buying, selling, or trading sports trading cards, 314 is your best stop to do that. Andrew's already spent all of his money there. Apparently, eBay has already spent all of his money there. No surprise on eBay. Thanks, 314. Let's go into another, like, what did we learn, right? So what can the Cardinals learn, Sandy, from their continued struggles in the postseason? So context, Cardinals, let's go back to 2019. They make the NLCS and get swept by the Nationals. That was weird. Kind of weird that they made it there. Shouldn't really have, but it was cool. Yeah. 2020, they faced the Padres. They win one game in that series, if I remember right. And then
they won the first game, and then they should have won the second game. And some really questionable managing that left Daniel Ponce de Leon in the game with it on the line and a lead.
Who are you trying to blame here? Padres manager Mike Shildt?
Well, yeah. Why was Fernando Tatis Jr. facing Daniel Ponce de Leon? Anyway. They lose that series and then get shut out game 3, which was brutal.
Yep, and somehow Dylan Carlson's batting cleanup for you as a rookie, which is just interesting. Yeah, I'm not necessarily blaming Ollie Shildt for that one. It's like, can we have some more offensive support there? And then they go get more offensive support. They go and get Nolan Arenado, and they lose in the wild card series to the Dodgers. Chris Taylor, not great.
Walk off home.
Yep, not fun.
Like a regular team. I wish we could do that.
Yeah, I wish. 2022 comes around. They lose game 1 in heartbreaking fashion. Ryan Helsley comes in. Yeah, that was really tough. We could talk. I mean, you could debate all day what Ollie should have done there. For the most part, felt like he pulled the right strings that game, pulled Quintana out at the perfect time. things didn't go well. Game 2, I think they got shut out. If I remember right, I was at that game. Miles Michaelis pitched a gem against I can't remember if it was Nola or Zach Wheeler
Magic
that game,
Mike.
and they lost.
It was Nola, because Nola owns the Cardinals. I remember walking into the stadium saying the Cardinals won't score until the 8th inning. As long as Michaelis pitches well, we've got a shot.
So they consistently make the playoffs and get knocked out. But then you see a team like the Mets go on a run, or you see the Tigers go on a run, or you see these other teams going on a run. Sandy, why do the Cardinals struggle in the playoffs?
Okay, before we do this disclaimer, I am going to say something that's probably going to bother people. I saw someone else commented earlier, and I agree with you. Okay. I think it's really hard to draw lessons from the MLB playoffs. The sample size is so small. When I see the takes that say Aaron Judge can't hit in the playoffs, I say Aaron Judge was 0 for 6 to start the playoffs, and people are freaking out about it. If Aaron Judge went 0 for 6 in April over a 2-day stretch, nobody would bat an eye, because it's impossible to draw anything from a sample that small, right? We're about to dive deep into roughly 10 Cardinals games. The Cardinals had stretches this year where they went 9-1. And if we looked at that, we could say they're the best team in the world. And they had stretches this year where they went 1-9. And if we look at that, we would say the Cardinals are the Chicago White Sox. So my thing is, before, like, the disclaimer, it's really hard to take anything out of the postseason. I think a lot of it is a crapshoot. But
can I play devil's advocate a little bit on that?
Absolutely.
So, like, because I mostly agree with that, but I've been thinking a little bit about that. It's like, well, is there a certain point where you have to start being like, well, that is what the playoffs are, and you're either built for it or you're not, and you either come through or you don't, and no one guarantees you 100 at-bat sample size in the postseason. You get like Mike Trout has had one time in the postseason, and like we can say it was a small sample size, but like that was his opportunity to come through and he didn't, and that's the postseason. And again, it doesn't mean if you ran it back 100 times he wouldn't have been a 500 hitter and like done a bunch of things, and just we got the bad at bats that we got. But is there an argument? And again, I'm not sure where I feel on it yet, but is there an argument that it's like small sample size when you compare it to regular season baseball, it's not the same, but the lights are shining the brightest right now. This is what you came here to play for, and results are all that matters.
There is something about just some players like step up to the plate. Fernando Tatis Jr. is the best postseason hitter of all time. In all of baseball history, he leads everybody in the playoffs with more than 40 at-bats in the playoffs in batting average, slugging, on-base percentage, and OPS entering tonight. It's crazy. Like, he just thrives in the postseason. And there are other guys that don't. Clayton Kershaw has, tell me about it. Clayton Kershaw has a really, really long track record of not being his best self in the postseason.
Yeah.
Guys like Chris Carpenter, like he was a bulldog in the postseason. There was something about David Freese. But I'm still willing to say that for the most part, I believe it is luck in the postseason. Now, if your team is better than the other team, like the reason the Dodgers go farther in the postseason on average is because they have the better roster. Like, it's luck, and it's still a crapshoot, but hey, you give yourself a 65% chance to win the series versus a 50-50. Like, it's not a straight coin flip or anything like that. But I think it's mostly luck.
But also, to your point, the nature of baseball in regular season, like, well, this year the Cardinals are one of the few teams to lose a series to the White Sox, but typically you can go into any regular season and look who the worst team in baseball was, and it's not shocking if they take 2 of 3 from the best team in baseball. Correct. Or sweep them. Like, that stuff happens. And so for it to happen in October, especially, I mean, these aren't the worst teams in baseball. They're the teams that have the 7 best records in the National League and American League.
Yep.
Or 8 best records. Wait, how many teams make the playoffs now? 6. I was overshooting a little bit. Like, it's not crazy that the Tigers can take 2 of or 3 of 5 from the Yankees.
Yeah, like, it's not an absurd thought at all. Baseball. It just is the way it works. Baseball, and like, that's the thing. People try to analyze the MLB playoffs the way they analyze the NFL playoffs, for example. Football, there's not a lot of luck in football. Like, it doesn't, there is some stuff that's random and lucky, and sometimes it's just the way the ball bounces. But for the most part, it's really, really hard to pull off a big upset in football.
Or basketball is a good comparison, right? You almost always see the super teams, 1-2 seed make it all the way to the finals. Like, you never see an 8 seed make it there unless they like had a bunch of injuries and like made it as the 8 seed, but they're really the best team.
Well, the 8 seed has only beaten the 1 seed in the NBA playoffs, I think twice ever.
I think you're right.
It just doesn't happen. And like even in March Madness, where the sample size is much smaller, so it allows for more upsets because, like, as the 8 seed, it's really hard to beat the 1 seed 4 times. I remember years ago, the Bulls were the 8 seed and the Celtics were the 1 seed. The Bulls won the first 2 games, and still everybody's picking the Celtics to win the next, 4 out of the next 5 because they're the best team, and they did. They ended up winning 4 straight and won the series. It's just the way it works sometimes. Even in March Madness, it's really hard to pull off big upsets. You never pick a 15 seed because you think it's going to happen, right? It just doesn't work that way. You pick it and you get lucky every once in a while. That's fun. I love when those upsets happen. But the point is, in baseball, it's just really hard to do that. And if you took the best 8 teams from each league, the 8 would beat the 1 in baseball probably like 30% of the time. It's just the way it would work. It just happens that way. But I will say there is something to be said about roster construction made for the playoffs. And I know that's where I think that's where we want to go with this. There's something to be said about having a guy that can pitch in the postseason. Look at the Tigers, look at Tarek Skubal, right? Like, that's what we want to draw from this. You need an ace. You need a stopper. And I don't think the reason is because aces perform better in the playoffs. I think it's because that gives you the best chance to win one game.
Yep.
Right? That's the point. The point is you need to give yourself the best opportunity to win just one game. And that's what an ace does for you. That's what Chris Carpenter did for the Cardinals all through 2011. That game 5, putting Chris Carpenter out there and like him being able to throw a complete game shutout, that gave the Cardinals a great chance to win the game. All they had to do was scratch one run across the plate.
It almost feels like you're the pitching argument, because I think I totally agree that we're talking roster construction wise. That's one of the first things we should talk about. Like having a Tarek Skubal, like how he's right now, or having that Chris Carpenter, having that Madison Bumgarner from years before. They're like a trump card. You play them and you probably win that game. And in a playoff series, we had to win 3, or if it's 1 of 1, like instant win, right?
Yeah.
If it's best of 3, you just took 33% of the series from playing your one card. Again, best of 7. You can
and you hope you can scratch through the other ones. Look at the Tigers running a bullpen day today.
For sure.
Like, it was pitching chaos.
So if you can get one of those guys, it is a huge advantage because it can also cover up some other issues you have, where you could drop game 2 because you throw out a terrible starter that has to play, but then your bullpen's strong enough to win you game 3, and then you throw your ace again in game 4 or game 5 and you win the series. Like, that's what that does. Or which you want that plus other things, but like we saw at the Rangers, where it's like Nathan Eovaldi and Jordan Montgomery. Those guys are not Tarek Skubal, Chris Carpenter, Madison Bumgarner types, but they can pitch with those type of guys or slightly below those guys on any given day. And if you have 2 or 3 of those guys going into a series, that's another advantage you can have, where it's like going into each game. I don't know for a fact, like this guy couldn't be okay today, but they have the ability to go 7 shutout innings, 6 shutout innings against a top roster with the lights on the brightest. That's also something the Cardinals have lacked, where when they made the postseason and they lost to the Phillies, like Jose Quintana and Miles Michaelis were awesome, but I do not have confidence they would have been awesome continuing to go into playoffs. This year, having Sonny Gray would have been huge. I know Andre Ponte was good this year, but like if you had Sonny Gray and another Sonny Gray type, it's like, no, you'd rather have Tarek Skubal. Obviously, he's not Chris Carpenter. Obviously, he's not Madison Bumgarner. But those guys can pitch with those guys and keep your lineup into a bullpen, and that's something the Cardinals haven't had.
Yeah, for sure. But I want to play devil's advocate to that and say the Cardinals have had really good pitching in these games where they've lost, actually.
True.
Like, let's look back.
But they haven't gone deep. And so I'm thinking
Adam Wainwright pitched into the 7th in 2021.
No, I'm saying the team hasn't gone deep.
Oh, yeah.
Agreed, in these small sample sizes, the pitching hasn't actually been the issue. But if you're like thinking like, could they win a World Series? Again, I know it's hard for me to believe, except that lineup with Pujols, Goldschmidt, Arenado was special. Maybe something could happen.
I think that team could have done something. I think that was a really good team.
Most of the time, Jose Quintana and Miles Michaelis leading your rotation is not going to be a good formula. But yes, agreed there.
Yeah, I mean, even if you look back at 2019, like the offense, it was maybe the most painful 4-game series ever because the offense was so putrid and the pitching was so good. Miles Michaelis was the game 1 starter, and I remember he was fantastic. Like everybody pitched well in 2019 until the last game where the Cardinals the writing was on the wall. They were down 3-0. They got beat up. But at no point in that series did it feel like the Nationals were just destroying them offensively. The Cardinals just couldn't hit. And that's been the real problem. And I really do think hitting in the postseason is just so strange. Like for some reason in the 30 plate appearances he's had in the postseason in recent years, Aaron Judge hasn't been good. For some reason, George Springer is like the best postseason hitter ever when he gets there. Like, isn't he like all time in postseason home runs? That's weird.
I think so.
David Freese had probably the best single postseason of all time. And you know who had the next best? A young Randy Arozarena with Tampa Bay. Randy Arozarena is pretty good, but come on. He was not having a great year this year. He's not a superstar. He's never contended for an MVP.
True.
David Freese never really he was never really even an all-star caliber player. He was awesome during that one postseason run, and he was a great role player in St. Louis. And we all love David Freese. But it's just weird. The postseason is just really, really weird. Sometimes your stars show up. Lance Berkman was a star for the Cardinals in 2011. He showed up in the playoffs, right? Albert Pujols came up huge in the playoffs a couple times. He had that 3-homer game in the World Series. It was awesome. But you're just never guaranteed that kind of stuff. And hitting in the postseason is just strange.
It's almost like you used this analogy earlier or something like that. Like if you spend like the Dodgers and build like the Dodgers, you can increase your chances more than other people. But there's almost there's like I don't know what the arbitrary number is, but like maybe like the best you can actually raise your odds is like 60% chance you're going to win that series or 65% chance. There's just not really a world in baseball where you can guarantee you're going to go far because of the weirdness of it. But there's ways you can, because it's like, you don't like, as much as we like, you could be the Tigers and like surprise people and do stuff like that's just, there's a lot like the Giants are like a very similar type team, but they didn't catch fire and do that. Like, you don't want to have to bank on we're not good enough, but we're going to catch fire at the right time. It's like, well, like, okay, well, every team can think that of themselves.
Yeah, you always.
I would rather be the team that has the talent and can catch fire than be the team that's like, okay, we have some talent but catch fire. But I do think there's some formulas that, like, again, David Freese can pop off, right? Or Randy Arozarena can pop off. But again, having a couple middle of the order bats you can rely on, having some lineup depth and a mix of different types of way to win the game, right? Like it's not just home runs. You don't only hit home runs, where the Yankees kept getting knocked out early in October because like they just struck out and home run all the time. And when they made it to the postseason, like swings and miss, they were getting shut out. Guys weren't leaving stuff in the zone. They weren't going deep. I feel like they have a more balanced lineup.
You also have to slug in October.
Yeah, but you have to slug too.
The slapped ball teams the Cardinals used to throw out there that didn't work all of a sudden. 2015.
Yeah, but then you also have, I mean, like the Tigers, there's been some games this series where a lot of big hits were like singles up the middle or double, like, so you have to have both. But you also need to have one or two top starters and you need to have a strong back of the bullpen. It's like, there's all these ingredients where it's like, well, sure, you could technically overcome it, but if you have a couple back end arms, you have a couple starters, you have a middle of the order, and you have some interesting pieces around it, now you are cooking with some pieces, and we'll see. There's also a lot of other well-constructed teams. So usually you're not going to get to a postseason and like every team has some kind of flaw. You can't be no team's really going to be perfect entering October, but if you can have multiple of those ingredients, and I think you could argue some years the Cardinals had some of those ingredients, sometimes they've kind of had those ingredients, but they're like never like a true strength, or they're like, oh yeah, we have a pretty good bullpen or a pretty good rotation or a pretty good lineup, but there's not truly lead in anything. But there's some things they could see from that. Anything else you would take from maybe what we see in the postseason so far as like things the Cardinals can learn?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, established middle of the order bats are great. Like look at the Dodgers with Ohtani, Betts, and Freeman. But I mean, it's just it's so hard to say the Cardinals should have that because none of those players are homegrown. Like the Dodgers went out and swung a massive trade and then signed Mookie Betts to one of the biggest extensions in MLB history. They went out and signed Ohtani to the biggest deal in MLB history by a wide margin. And they also went out and signed Freddie Freeman to a gargantuan extension. And it required some, strange business on the part of his agent. So it's really hard to like say they should have any of that, honestly, the big takeaway for me now that I'm thinking about it, name the last postseason team to dominate with homegrown talent.
Well, it's always, I feel like it's never, I don't know if it's ever fair to say it's all homegrown talent anyways, but like the Astros were, I mean, I know they always brought in George Springer and guys like that, but they had homegrown talent. They still do.
That's a pretty good
Cubs had that. I mean, the Dodgers until recently, they did have Corey Seager and they had Cody Bellinger and they had young pitching that they had. So like the Braves also, or they would
Those
make really good. So I do think to your point, it's not like if the Cardinals are thinking they're just going to develop homegrown talent, that's wrong. I don't think they're thinking that way. I think like most of these really good teams have a base of that, and then they supplement what they need. Where it's like, oh, we developed a lot of really good pitching, we go out and get that middle of the order bat, or we have a couple middle of the order bats, we have some good pitching, we don't have an ace, we go get that ace.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't know.
but
I'm just thinking about teams like the Brewers with a ton of homegrown talent that haven't done anything in
yeah,
October, or the
but
Orioles
they can't
had
supplement,
2 brutal
and they choose
exits.
not to supplement,
Yeah.
right? So it's like,
Yeah, or like even Seattle can't get there. They're choosing not to
which,
supplement though.
yeah. So it's like if
Yeah,
you're
you
a
have to have a
team that
mix.
has that core, but then you also go over the top to bring in the stuff you are lacking, those teams tend to be the juggernauts or the top tier teams. When
Yeah.
if you try to spend all the way, well, Mets are a bad example because they're going to NLCS now. But like you see recently, it's like the Mets didn't really have I mean, they had some pretty good players in place, but then they went in and tried to spend a bunch of money to get there, and it didn't work because they tried to basically fix all their problems with money. When if you have a good, when if you can develop a good team, and then you want to turn great by getting that ace or making that big trade for that big bat, whatever it is, you can go deep. But I think it's a good point though, where it's like if the Cardinals try to be Milwaukee Brewers, that's not a great recipe for postseason success.
No. No, not at all. I think it's important to say, like, it's not every single time, but the majority of teams in the postseason do make that aggressive move that the Cardinals have struggled to make in recent years. I mean, you have to at some point. Yeah, I see people in here saying Cleveland, Kansas City, Detroit, but I don't know. Each of these teams have had a weird journey to the postseason. Like Cleveland really, really, really overachieved this year, and they still haven't won a postseason series yet this year. So, you can't really say that.
Yeah,
Uh,
Lucas brings up the Phillies as like a free agent team, which they're mostly exception to norm. But they, yes, Stott, Bohm, Nola's on a free agent
Nola,
contract now, but they
but
did develop
yeah,
Nola. Then anyways, so it's like yes and no. Like, but like they're the exception, right? Like the Rangers have a lot of talent they brought in, but also have a young core too. So for the
yeah, you have
most
to have
part, the
some of
formula,
both. You have
yeah,
to have some of both. But yeah, I mean, and like the teams that don't do it are weird teams. Like I think that has to be stated.
for
Like
sure.
if the Tigers win the World Series this year, it'd be really fun. I'm probably rooting for them the rest of the way,
Yeah, it'd be
but
fun.
that's a really weird team to win a World Series.
Just looking back, it'd be if you told me in May the Tigers were going to win the World Series, I'd be like,
If you told me in May the
what?
Tigers would be up 2-1 in the ALC or the ALDS, I'd be like, whoa, really?
There's no way.
That's a strange
Yeah.
thing.
Well, Sandy, I think we kind of addressed the original question I was going to ask you for this, but I actually want to ask it in a different way because we've kind of danced around the
Yeah.
playoff format stuff. But instead of necessarily, I mean, we can ask if it's a good, well, okay, theme of the episode, what can the Cardinals learn from the playoff format? But so we can ask I mean, we kind of talked about that a little bit, and maybe we can like debate whether they're learn the right lessons from it. But I'm actually more interested in your opinion on if you think this is good for baseball. Do you think it's good for baseball? We have so much variance and so many teams in there where there's a chance not I think it's if the Dodgers lose this series, every single NLD, every single National League team that's had a bye has lost that series since the new playoff formats happened.
That's
Like, is
insane.
that good for baseball that the top teams consistently get knocked out now? Or I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple ways to look at it. Like, I like parity in sports generally. I think that's one of the reasons the NFL is really good. Like, it's been a long time. Like, almost every NFL team has made the playoffs in the last 5 years, and I think that's a really good thing. But also, the expanding playoff format there helps that happen. I don't like the expanding playoff format in baseball for a few reasons. It's hard to like break all this down, I guess, properly. But I'll just say this: I think I really appreciated that before in baseball, it was really hard to make the playoffs. And then once you make the playoffs, it's fairly easy to win a championship. And I think that's like a good thing for baseball, right? Like the season is so drawn out because in a game like baseball with so much luck, you need a huge sample size to figure out who the best teams are.
Yeah.
And then once you have the best teams, they just get thrown into another bowl. And then we basically just pick a winner. And that's kind of how the postseason felt. Obviously, it's a lot more than that. It's dramatic and awesome, and there's these amazing things that happen. Look at 2011 with the Cardinals, right? But
Yeah.
that Cardinals team is as random as it gets. I think if you had told the Cardinals beforehand, hey, you can either play through your schedule or we can throw everybody in a bowl with equal chances to win, the Cardinals would have taken that second option. Like it's random. That was awesome about baseball. With the
Yeah.
new playoff format, I think you get a lot of teams that don't necessarily deserve to be there quite as much, and I think that's a bummer. Especially if you're going to have this long, drawn-out regular season to decide, who really merits inclusion.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think you also make a point here to say these big market teams, like a Dodgers-Yankees World Series, is probably really good for baseball. It's not good for me. I don't like it. I don't care for it. It's not good for Cardinals fans, but for like the casual, uninterested person, it's probably really good to have Aaron Judge, Shohei Ohtani, Mookie Betts, Juan Soto, Freddie Freeman, Garrett Cole, all on your screen. Like that's probably a really good thing. It's probably good for exposure. It probably makes the most money. It's the biggest TV markets. And by expanding the playoffs, MLB is taking that away. They're making that way less likely because those teams have to play through extra rounds.
Yeah.
Right? Like both those teams were the best in their respective leagues. The Dodgers are the 1 seed in the NL, the Yankees are the 1 seed in the AL. Under the original format, they would have just played each other in the World Series, and baseball could virtually guarantee that with how the giant discrepancies between roster construction and payroll. But also there's another angle of it where like an extra round makes more money. All of everyone that tuned into the wild card games, like that made so much more money for baseball. So I don't know. It's a really complicated issue. There's a ton of ways to look at it. I'll just say at the end of the day, I don't really like it. I think it's really stupid that you can win your division and then be eliminated before the divisional series. At least rename it. Like, call it the quarterfinals. It's so stupid.
Yeah. I'd say like, and Space makes a good point in the chat, like NL, especially the Dodgers Padres, has been exciting. It may end up being the best series of the playoffs. And I feel like in general, the playoffs have been really fun this year.
They have.
And so like it's hard to hate on that for sure. But like honestly, I was thinking about it when the Mets, like it was when the Mets officially beat the Phillies. I was kind of like, I'm kind of bummed. I kind of wanted to see the Phillies go up against the Padres or the Dodgers. And like I don't like the Dodgers and I don't like the Yankees, but I kind of want to see a Dodgers-Yankees World Series, even as someone who just loves baseball and loves the small markets, wants to see the small market teams succeed. Like getting a 7-game series of Ohtani versus Judge, Soto versus Betts, Freeman, well, Stan's not as big a name, but you know, like Stan's in there, Freeman, Cole, Yamamoto, Rip Glass now, but like there's some really like that could be electric, and not that Tigers Mets couldn't be electric, but it's just different. And I think it kind of sucks that we haven't really gotten to like a lot of the World Series recently haven't been the best. Like I honestly,
Diamondbacks Rangers was like almost doomsday scenario for baseball.
Yeah, and like some of Houston Philly was fun, but it wasn't great. But that was a good matchup. Like those are two fun teams. But like I think the last World Series, and maybe I'm missing one in my head, but the last World Series that I thought was awesome was Dodgers Astros, where there was a game that went to like 14 innings or super high scoring, and like I don't know. I think there was enough fun upsets in the old format that I don't think it necessarily needed more teams in it to create the extra fun. Where like you did have the Cardinals in 2011, right? You did have the Cardinals in 2006. You had the the Royals were good those years, but like you had some weird outlier teams make runs, and then you also had but you also didn't have as many of the big teams falling out as frequently as they do now.
Oh, for sure.
Go ahead.
There's the whole thing about like the bye, and is the bye bad? Like I think that's something that baseball really needs to fix. Even as someone who it's never impacted my team, but like I'll tell you what, if my team won a bye and then lost because they sat for 3 days while the other or 4 days while the other team played, like I'd be mad. I'd be really mad. And I understand why those fans complain. It is an open question as to whether sitting is better. Obviously, it guarantees admittance to the DS, which is great. Right? Like the other teams have a 50-50 shot of getting there. You would always take the 100% chance to get there. But there's a real question of once the team makes it through, do they now have an advantage over the team that had to bye? And that is really stupid.
For sure. So I think there's at least kinks like that. I don't know how you fix it or figure it out. Like that doesn't seem like there's
go back to the 2 wild card scenario. Also, the 1 game wild card was so electric, and I'm sorry, it's not as good anymore.
Yeah, I think that's where well, that's where it's like that's an easy seems like an easy solution, but it's like there's no way they're gonna.
No, they'll lose so much money. They're not gonna go back to it.
So it's like now that you've opened Pandora's box here and you have these many teams in, how do you make it work in a better way? And I just don't. I mean, again, I haven't sat down to think it through that much, but I do think that's a problem. And anyways, it's frustrating to say the least. Yeah, it's weird that I'm saying I want a Dodgers-Yankees World Series, but I just do this year, and it kind of sucks that I don't know. Like I'm in some ways I'm rooting for the Tigers because it would be fun, but also like a Tigers Mets World Series. I don't know, man. I don't know. I'll still watch it. I love baseball. It'll probably have some awesome moments, but it's like,
could you imagine if we got?
Do I really want Kerry Carpenter versus Pete Alonso?
I like Kerry Carpenter.
I could have had Aaron Judge versus Shohei Ohtani. That seems a little more fun.
I mean, there's a chance that a series like that still has like a ton of fireworks.
Yeah.
Like I'll be honest, I don't think the actual quality of baseball is diminished by having weird teams make it.
True.
Like, I don't think that's an issue. And I think
True.
actually it's worse when you only have one weird team make it and like
Oh,
someone just
for
dominates
sure.
them.
For sure. The like
Um,
actual worst case, you're right, is probably Tigers Dodgers World Series or like Yankee.
yeah.
Oh, Yankees Mets actually would be really fun because it's a New York series. But yeah, that's a good point. Or
Yeah.
like Royals Dodgers. Much yeah, Bobby Witt and Andrew can go to a Shohei Ohtani a World Series game then. But
Yeah.
anyways, well, again, we'll be continuing to be live streaming through the playoffs, and then as the off season comes and go, or well, it will it'll be a while before it goes. Um, any like I guess we haven't gone to catch up much. Real quick, any like new thoughts or big picture thoughts you have about Cardinals entering the off season right now?
I just keep seeing more positive things come out about Heim Bloom, his need to restructure everything. I'm all for that, obviously. But I don't know. I'm just sitting here more and more. Like, I've just had a lot of time to stew on the idea of a rebuild. And like, I know it's probably best for the organization, but I just hate it.
Mm,
And I think a lot of fans are really going to hate it. I think a lot of people are going to be in the similar position to me where it just stinks. It stinks to the Cardinals haven't waved the white flag in April in 20 years. And I'm not
well,
saying they're waving the white flag.
yeah,
Like, I'm not going to say that completely, but the Cardinals haven't entered a season saying we might not be good in a long time. Like, they've at least presented it as, hey, we're contending for this division. We want to win the World Series. And
yeah.
even if that's a lie, they've at least told us that. I think this is the first time in a long time where they're going to be saying, well, we're going to see how it goes.
Yeah, I do think I'm starting to think because there's been a lot of writing out there about it where I'm like, it just feels like someone knows something at this point. It's not just speculation where there's a lot of ideas out there about, oh, they like ownership and John Mozeliak are trying to lower the bar enough that like this team can surprise people and excite people. And so like surprising excite people could be 81, 82 wins. And that's actually probably what it is. It's like
It's
they
fine.
just barely make the playoffs or miss the playoffs, but it's a fun team. I think like when we're thinking rebuild right now, like, and again, we can talk about this, especially as you get into the offseason. Like, I mean, like, it's until we get to the offseason, until we see what the Cardinals do. Like, there's a world where I like the Cardinals roster more than the current Tigers roster. And like, so like, I don't think I'm not going to predict the Cardinals are going to make the playoffs or do anything like that. I'm not trying to say that, but there's a world where this team sucks. That's true. But I think there's more outcomes where they're okay. And honestly, they could be about as good as they were this year, because the talent you're potentially losing, unless it's Sonny Gray and Wilson Contreras, then those are bigger. But the talent you're potentially losing wasn't huge factors, and you're hoping that some of these young guys take steps forward. And a lot of these guys we've already seen take steps before too. So it's not like out of character for Nolan Gorman to be good or Jordan Walker to be good.
Yeah.
It's like we've seen that before. And like, what does a rotation when you've got Quinn Matthews and Michael McGreevy in it look like? Like, could look pretty decent. So like, there's some things to be optimistic and excited about. But to your point, it does suck that it's like usually go into the offseason being like, what can the Cardinals do to position themselves to win a World Series, to win a division, go deep in October? And this time around, we're like, what can we do? What can they do to build their farm system up? What can they do to set themselves up for 2026? But I do think it could be an exciting offseason, or at the very least, the most interesting offseason we've seen in a long time.
Perhaps.
Eventful. Yeah.
I mean, I would do eventful. I'll be honest. Like, I actually had a lot of fun at the 2023 trade deadline. Like, the season really sucked. And especially after the deadline was really a bummer. But the deadline was fun. They made a bunch of moves and like,
True.
I could see a direction. I thought it was a really good deadline for the Cardinals, actually. I thought they did a lot of really good things. And I think there's no reason to think they couldn't have a similar offseason in that sense. Like, if they go get a big name for Ryan Helsley, someone that we can be really excited about, like maybe they swing a trade with the Orioles, they package something else and they bring in a Heston Kjerstad. Probably not going to happen, but like, that'd be really exciting. That'd be a great offseason. They could have like an A grade offseason that would get me interested. I just don't know how the average fan is going to feel about it.
We'll see. And I think to Bill's point, like they could potentially not even win 70 games next year. I think that's on the lowest range of outcomes. And I think it's very unlikely they don't win 70 games, but it's possible. And it's also possible they somehow win 84 games. Like it'll be interesting. So again, we'll be on off season covering all this stuff. We appreciate all of the support of the podcast and everyone who tunes in. Again, you guys make this community so awesome. And so we really appreciate it. Go check out 314 Sports Cards and Collectibles. Like and subscribe helps the channel a ton, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, Heim.
Thanks, Tigers.